Data is almost always more interesting when compared with other data or when presented in some meaningful context. For example, this association gives the population of a particular country in millions of people every 10 years for about the past 100 years, and here are similar data sets for a few other similarly sized countries. Here is a plot of the data for the first country, and for comparison, here is a plot of all of these data sets. The data for the first country is identified here as example using a callout label. The plot of the data for the first country by itself is potentially useful, of course, but the second plot showing that data in the context of other comparable data sets makes it easier to identify features of the example data set that might be especially interesting or unusual. One common issue when comparing data sets is that the numbers in one data set may be much bigger or much smaller than the numbers in other data sets. For example, these inputs introduce population data for the entire world and for two other countries with very different populations. A plot of this data, together with the population data for the example country, uses a vertical scale that is sensible for showing the population of the world, but on that scale, some of the data is barely visible. One common way of dealing with this problem is to show several plots side by side or in a grid. For example, this input shows that data as a grid of plots with a different vertical scale for each plot. Showing a small multiple of plots like this can work well for comparing datasets if the number of datasets is small enough that all of the plots fit easily on a page and can reasonably be viewed at the same time. Another approach to this problem is to rescale the data. For example, this shows a plot of that data after dividing each dataset by the population in 1960. This approach has the benefit of getting all of the data on one plot and can work well if the purpose of the plot is to compare trends in the data rather than the absolute sizes of the numbers in the different datasets. There are lots of other issues that can come up that are specific to certain types of data or certain types of plots. For example, consider making a plot for comparing the distribution of temperatures in these two data sets. A basic box and whisker chart is a nice way to show that the temperatures in the first data set are generally higher and are spread out over a larger range than the temperatures in the second data set. The distributions of temperatures in these datasets could also be compared using histograms. This input shows a pair of histograms for these two datasets, and this shows a similar pair of histograms but with the bin sizes and plot ranges set so that both histograms use the same bins. Just as it is easier to compare line plots that use the same horizontal and vertical scales, it is also easier to compare histograms that use the same bins. The histograms that use the same bins, for example, make it easier to see the difference in variability and the difference in average temperature between these two datasets. Here is an input that shows another way of comparing these histograms. This input uses the paired histogram function to create a chart called a paired histogram, with the bars of each histogram shown horizontally on opposite sides of a shared vertical scale that labels the bins. A paired histogram is a good way of comparing two histograms. It gets both histograms on one chart with data sorted into the same bins, and in this example, like the box and whisker chart, gives a visual indication without even needing to look at the scale of the chart that the temperatures in the first data set are generally higher and more spread out than the temperatures in the second data set. That's the end of the examples, but there are lots of other ways of setting up plots and charts for comparing data sets. The point of all of these examples, as noted initially, is simply to demonstrate that often a good way to show important features in a data set is to find some sort of a plot or chart for comparing that data with a reference or with other similar data.